Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedule. My name is Philomena Dor-Slovak, and I am a school social worker with the Waterloo Region District School Board. And I just want to start by thanking Tiffany so much for not just for the help and support today, but all the help and support leading up to this Lunch and Learn today. I also want to acknowledge that this Lunch and Learn and preparing for it was a collaboration between myself and another school social worker that I work with, the wonderful Abina Pepra, and she just wasn't able to join me today in delivering the Lunch and Learn, but we worked together in creating it. So the topic that we're going to be delving into today is navigating online use, helping children build healthy digital habits. And I wanted to first, and we can go on to the next slide, Tiffany, thank you. I wanted to first just give a little bit of background around these topics around screen use. So this presentation today, or this Lunch and Learn today, is actually the second installment of a series of 4 Lunch and Learns that the psychology department and the social department is putting on. And the 4 Lunch and Learns that one has already happened a few weeks ago, and this is the second one, they're all in relation to screen use. And this actually came about after a workshop that some of the psychologists and social workers attended over the summer, and it was put on through School Mental Health Ontario and the Hospital for Sick Children. And it was a workshop delivered by this gentleman who's also a social worker, Jack Ernst. And he covered, it was an excellent workshop, and he covered a variety of topics about screen use. And a group of us felt like the information was really helpful and really informative, and we wanted to take it and deliver some aspects of it through Lunch and Learn so that we can share with parents and caregivers. So as I mentioned, this is the second installment. The first installment is about the role of dopamine in screen use, and it was delivered actually by the wonderful Tiffany and her psychology consultant colleague, Liz Stevens. And so that first installment is something that I would recommend that you watch. It's the video I have included it as a link at the end of this presentation. So we're going to be focused today, as I said, on helping children build healthy digital habits. And I'm going to be talking specifically about types of screen use. And I want to acknowledge that the information that I'm sharing and the references that I'm making, I did take from this workshop with Jake Ernst. So let's move on to the next screen. So why talk about screen use? So why is this important to talk about screen use? Why is it important to help our children build healthy digital habits? And that's because screens are a part of our everyday life, not just for our children, but for us as adults. And we are using screens in every part of our life, when we're working, when we're relaxing, when we're socializing, when we're learning. And the goal here isn't to eliminate screen use, because I think that's impossible. The goal is to really help children and families use it in a healthy way. So let's delve into the agenda for today. So I'm going to be talking about how type of screen use matters. And we're going to talk a little bit about signs of problematic screen use. And then we're going to talk about strategies to find a healthy balance with our digital usage. So for the next slide, I thought it might be informative and helpful to just even look at screen time, like how much time are our kids spending on screens, how much time are we spending on screens. So some of these stats I took from that workshop, and it's interesting to me, especially this first one. So 49% of 0 to 2-year-olds interact with smartphones once a day. And this next stat, so Generation Z, so that's the age range of between 11 to 26-year-olds, average around 9 hours of screen time per day. And most of that time is on social media, as we could probably guess. And adults, on average, spend about 7 hours a day on their screens, with about 3 hours on social media. And certainly, I can fall into that statistic that I do spend some time on screen. So I think that's important to put out there, because I think looking at our screen use is something not just that we want to do with our children, but also for ourselves as well. So let's go on to the next slide. So I put this down here as the $1,000,000 question, because I think as parents and caregivers, I think we've all asked ourselves this question. So how much screen time should my child have? And what we've learned, and certainly this workshop did really help in helping me understand this as a parent, is that screen time, so the time that we spend on screens, is really not as informative as screen use, so that the way that we're using screens. So there's a new perspective on screen time. It's actually more important to ask how we're using screens and what are we engaging in, versus how long we're on, how long we're using screen time, so how much time. So that brings us to that not all types of screen time is equal. It's more important to look at what are our children doing online and how are they engaging, and that matters more than just simply tracking hours. So the goal is on helping families focus on how screens are being used, what content is being chosen, and who is involved, rather than just counting the minutes and hours that your kids are online. Not that there aren't limits, of course, to the amount of time that we're spending on screens, but this conversation is a lot about the way that kids are engaging online. So that's what I wanted to focus on today. So the type of screen use does matter. So let's move on to the next slide, the many faces of screen use. So screen use can kind of be divided in these different types. So at the top we have active, and then as you move kind of clockwise, you have pro-social, passive, and antisocial. So active screen use is when we're making our own choices. Pro-social screen use is just as it is described. It is using screens as a way to enhance or build social connection. Now, the passive screen use is more where there's an algorithm that's making our choice. And then the antisocial screen use is sort of the opposite of the pro-social. You're using screens to avoid social connection. And I'm going to be talking about all those different types of screen use, but I'm going to start first by talking a little bit more about the active and pro-social, because that's where we want our kids to be, is sort of in that corner. We want our kids to be engaged online in an active way and in a pro-social way. And so what does that look like? So let's move on to the next. Thank you, Tiffany. So what does healthy screen use look like? So on this chart, we're focused on sort of that green area. And these are deliberate colors that Jake used, because green is sort of go. That's kind of like, if we think of it as like a traffic signal, that green area, so where we want even ourselves to be as adults. And then as you're moving into sort of the yellow and orange and red, moving into sort of that yellow and orange, which we also all, as adults too, we go into some of those areas, and I'll talk about that in a bit, is when we as parents, in terms of helping our children, we want to kind of be mindful of, because that's when we want to sort of help steer them, again, having their screen use be healthy. So what does active and pro-social screen use look like? So these are online activities, as you can see here, that promote social connections. So that could be examples where, your kids are on an online game, like for example, a Fortnite. I'm sure that some of you can probably relate to that. I have two older kids, and so they're going online and they're playing with their friends. So that is an active and pro-social way of using screens where they're connecting with their friends, they're talking with their friends, they're socializing. Active and pro-social use is safe and age appropriate. It builds connection and communication. So another example can be, a video chat with a friend or family member. um, Active and pro-social use of our screens is a way to boost creativity. It allows us to be creative. I think about my youngest who he doesn't do this as much now, but when he was younger, he would build all these amazing worlds in Minecraft. So certainly a very creative way of using screens. Or kids will sometimes make videos or they'll create music. So any kind of thing where you're sort of creating art or coding. And screen use can also be very educational. So the educational part of using our screens is also a way to be sort of actively engaging in a pro-social way. I think about my nephew who learned how to play the guitar by watching YouTube. So when we look at this active and pro-social use of screens, we're looking at healthy screen use being purposeful. So it's used for learning, creativity, social connection. It's balanced, so it's not replacing sleep. It's not replacing face-to-face interaction. Um, it's not replacing other sort of important tasks that even, I guess, children that they have in their day. It's shared, so parents are engaged, talking about content with their kids, maybe co-viewing. And it's enjoyable and calm. It's not hidden, it's not secretive, it's not something that creates uncomfortable feelings like stress or anxiety or guilt. So as parents and caregivers, we can ask ourselves, how is my child engaging online? Is my child using tech to connect and create? Are they using tech to just consume? And I'm going to talk more about what does that mean, like when you're just sort of consuming content online. So we want to be encouraging creation and interaction over sort of that passive scrolling. And I'll go more into that in a second. So again, ideally, we want our kids to stay within that green zone. So if we move on, let's look at when screen use becomes problematic. So when we kind of start moving away from that green area and we're kind of moving now into sort of that passive use, that yellow and orange, and where we sort of don't want to be within that red area. So that would be sort of that type of screen use that we don't want for ourselves or for our kids. So what does passive screen use look like? So that's when our kids are, I think we can all relate to when you're just sort of watching videos, but you're not sort of engaging, it's not interactive, you're just sort of taking in information. So it's sort of that passive way of engaging. And that's where I think there's that term sort of doom scrolling or mindless scrolling. It doesn't, that type of screen use doesn't create connection. If anything, actually, it promotes more isolation. So an example of that would be, let's say our children who are playing an online video game, let's say, but they're doing it alone. They're not playing online, let's say, with friends. So that in that under sort of that orange area, that it's like excessive solo gaming can be kind of an example of that. And it's important to be aware when our kids are sort of moving into these other areas, because what we know is that passive and antisocial screen use can have a negative impact on mental health and have a negative impact on mood and sleep and nutrition, and can have a negative impact on our relationships and on school. It can lead to problems at home. And so being mindful of that is important. Um, on the next screen, what we know too is that this more sort of passive and anti-social type of screen use can cause these things, can cause distraction, so poor attention, poor habits, poor sleep, a desire to check, meaning like a desire to constantly sort of be checking the phone, just checking our cell phone, can cause disconnection. So ignoring our health, being too self-focused can cause feelings of loneliness and isolation, and lack of relationships. And then that sort of red zone that we don't want ourselves to be in, or our kids, is where the screen use can create distress. So it can cause feelings of fear, anxiety when we're sort of engaged in perhaps apps that lead us to make comparisons, leads to feelings of needing to be perfect. And then for our kids, it can lead to perhaps um, looking at content that isn't age appropriate, that maybe has some violent content that we don't want them to see. So what do we do sort of as parents? How can we be sort of mindful, and what can we look out for? So what are some signs that can help us identify and address a potential issue before it gets too big? So these are questions that you can ask yourself as parents around around your child's sort of digital use. So, does your child prefer screens to hobbies, physical activities, and face-to-face interaction? Does your child's use of digital technology prevent them from engaging in other types of age-appropriate activities? Is it impacting their sleep? Is it impacting their nutrition? Do you notice that your child is maybe more irritable or anxious or sad or less interested in activities that they once enjoyed? Or do you find that there's a strong reaction to limiting their screen use? So that's an important question too. Is my child less engaged in school? That's maybe another important question. So those, I hope that those can be sort of areas that you can kind of be mindful of when looking at how to sort of then support our children in using our digital use in sort of a healthy way. And I wanted to go back to Tiffany and her colleague, a psychological consultant as well, Liz Stevens. They have put on the first installment of this series where they talk about the role of algorithms and the connection between algorithms and dopamine and screen use. So I'm not going to go into more detail in that here, but it is a really great video, and it is saved it is saved on YouTube, and I did link it at the end of this presentation. So that's something that I do encourage that everyone watches. So when we notice that our kids are moving into these sort of other ways of engaging in terms of their screen use, this sort of passive antisocial screen use, as I said, as parents, we need to take notice and then work with our kids around setting limits. So the next slide is really around, okay, so then what do we do? Like, what are some strategies that families can use to create more of a healthy balance? And so this particular slide I thought was helpful because it does provide some general guidelines to help guide you in terms of, because like there is, of course, there is a guideline in terms of how long, that we are engaging in each type of screen use and how long our kids are. So, and these guidelines are based on age. And so, so what this guideline is saying, and again, it's a guideline. So 1 hour or less of that sort of green screen use that I talked about, the active and pro-social. So for children in elementary school, it would be kind of 1 hour of that type of screen use a day. In middle school, again, that green that sort of pro-social active screen use can be 1 to 2 hours a day. In high school, that moves up to 2 to 4 hours a day. And when it comes to that sort of passive screen time, because certainly I have found myself, and I think we probably all have, right? That sort of passive, mindless scrolling. Like, I think about how there are certain YouTubers that I am subscribed to, and I like their content. And I say to myself, okay, I'm gonna watch for 20 minutes, and then all of a sudden it's 2 hours. So um, so the guideline there is less than 4 hours a day in terms of passive use of screen time. And in terms of the antisocial, sort of that red area is where we want to stop. Like we don't want our kids to be going into the more the area of the screen use that is sort of in the red area. Um, Now, I just wanted to go now into around some of those guidelines again. So strategies for a healthy balance. So what can that look like for your family? And I think what's important here is recognizing that this is more like I'm encouraging more of a conversation to have with your kids. Sorry, we're going to move on to that. Yes, thank you so much, Tiffany. So we want this to be more of a conversation with our kids. We don't, because again, as I was saying, we this is something that I think we can all sort of relate to, and that we can sort of tackle this more as a family. So we want the conversation to be more that we're working with our child versus them feeling like we're doing sort of something to them. So the first strategy here is around monitoring your own screen use, because as we know, kids learn from what they see. And so this is one of those we can't do a sort of do as I say, not as I do kind of. That doesn't work, as we know. Monitoring your own screen use can be a really great way to sort of model that we can be engaging online in a healthy way. And it's okay to be able to sort of say out loud, like I've spent too much time on the screens today. I need to kind of stop, scrolling. And it's okay for your kids to hear that. It's okay for them to see that that's really good role modeling for them. Keeping conversations open and not punitive. Again, you want it to be that you're having a conversation sort of with your child about these types of things. And you want to be using supportive language when you're sharing. If you're having sort of concerns on how your child's engaging online, you want to share it in a way that creates conversation and allows also your child to express their own thoughts and feelings. Um, and also looking at kind of considering a more gradual approach. So we're not looking at completely sort of banning kids off of their screens completely. But again, it's sort of a conversation to have together around setting those limits. Working with your child to set goals, creating a family media plan. I love this because again, it's about a plan that you're creating as a family sort of together. And so sort of looking at the where, when, and how screens are used. And you can create as a family the screen, what we can call sort of screen-free zones. That's something that we try to do as a family when we're having dinner, is that no one brings their phone to the table. Like not even my husband, who, says, well, I'm going to check my, emails. No, for these next 15 minutes, no one's going to be looking at their phone. And I know there's a strategy I think called like phone stacking. So everybody stacks their phone during meals, and designating these sort of tech-free zones. Another strategy could be using timers to kind of set a timer so that it can alert you or your child to kind of get off the screen, or looking at natural transitions, like maybe you're giving your child a time on screens like before dinner, let's say. And encouraging face-to-face interactions. That's really important. So you want to, that's that balance. So yes, some screen use that is active and pro-social, but also that they need to have time off their screens so that they're engaging in face-to-face interaction, and they're engaging in offline activities like hobbies, like sports, the things that, maybe allows for sort of their creativity. And anything that maybe allows for movement, that's important. And the last piece around explore a new hobby together. So that again is just as a family, maybe recognizing again this goal around maybe everybody kind of being mindful around how often they're on their screens and the way that they're using screens. And maybe coming up with sort of a goal as a family, like maybe it's an opportunity to come up with a hobby that the family can do together that will be fun for everybody and create that connection together. And yeah, I think that's all for today. I did include the references for that I spoke about, and um, as I mentioned, under the helpful resources, the Get Off Your Phone, Dopamine and Screen Addiction. That's the first installment that I talked about in terms of this 4-part series. And there are another 2 lunch and learns that are going to be coming up. And the other 2 videos that you see there were put on by the board's psychology department. And those 2 videos also provide some really good information. So that's the end. Thank you.